What exactly does a call from God mean? Well, you probably have your answer, but you also probably are misunderstanding the term. Today on the show, we are going to help to clear that misunderstanding so that it doesn't go on for much longer. We'll be listening to Father Anthony Nnaji, all the way from Upper Room Ministries from the Diocese of Enugu, as he gives us his take on what it means to be called by God. When we come back from this short break, we'll be looking at some of his answers and attempting to understand them more. Stay with us. Don't go anywhere. My name is Chima, and welcome to Catholic Faith Forum. Welcome back to the show. I am Chima, and this is Catholic Faith Forum. Today we are going to be trying to clear the air on the misunderstanding of what it means when God calls us. Father Anthony Nnaji sent us some very interesting answers when we went to interview him on the topic of what is God's call. So we'll be looking at some of his answers and trying to better understand them. First things first, there's a point I would like to make on this issue. When God calls you, it is only him and him alone that knows why he's calling you. There is a distinction between call and a profession. And Father Anthony has a very interesting take on this issue. Let's listen to him.
The issue about God's call is really a sensitive one. Sensitive in the sense that a lot of things come to play when we talk about call. And a lot of people get confused when it comes about whether God is giving an indication in his life to do this or do that. First of all, we need to distinguish between a profession and a call, because people seem to misplace two of them. Professionals may say that they are called to be that, they're called to be a medical doctor, they're called to be an engineer, you're called to be do that, but this learned act, things you can improve yourself on, does not necessarily mean a call in that very global sense of talking about call. When you talk about call, you're talking about a relationship between a person and a God or a deity that is inviting him in his life to do some specific service. You find out that in the African traditional religion, there are too many people who are called to be priests, who are called to be, you find out that we have three kinds of priests in African religion, but none of them imposes those things in them. We have the priests who are in charge of libation, people who are in charge of divination, people who are in charge of sacrifice. These three aspects of African traditional priests, none of them, nobody just picks this duty upon himself by himself. It does seem that the deity involved indicates interest in the person, and by way of trying to find out, normally by divination, you'll be able to find out this person was called by this God to serve the God.
So just like Father Anthony said, a call is between you and God, and it's up to him to give you his task. A profession is quite different from a call. A profession is something you train yourself to do. But with God's call, you receive everything that you need to move on with that ministry. You could decide to still serve God without receiving a call, but that would just be an act of worship from yourself to God. So make sure you understand this bit. A call is a divine message in any form of way that God uses to contact you to come and give your life to service to him, while a profession is different from a call. Some people believe that they are called to be presenters, they are called to be medical doctors, they are called to be whatever, but that is not a call, because you can actually decide to train yourself as a medical doctor, or you can decide to even leave that profession and do something else, and you claim God calls you as well. If you decide to serve God in that mode, it is just an act of worship between you and God. So make sure that you keep your ears attuned, keep your mind and your soul attuned, so that you can pick up when God calls you. And it's up to you to decide to answer that call or not. That's between you and God. It's also important to note that a call is much more specific and can come in a lot of ways. It can come in the dream, like Samuel. It can come through somebody giving you some certain word, or maybe you listening to a preaching, or you listening to a message, or you watching a video and getting that call. A call is very specific, because that's the difference between a call and a profession, whereby you have to go through several options to find where you fit and where you belong. So make sure you understand this when people say they are called to be medical doctors and when people actually talk about God's call. Okay, so how can you tell God's call from any other call? Some people receive lots of calls in their lives, but which one exactly is God's call? Let's listen to what Father Anthony has to say on this.
So when it comes to a call in the real Christian life, as somebody is called to service, the first thing you will ask is who is calling you and how do you know that the person is calling you. Sometimes some people come to us and say that they have tried every business, they've tried that, and the meantime people meet them on the road and say, you have a call, don't you know you have a call? And that you can see you with a lot of crowd around you. And because of that, they begin to think that God is calling them to pastor the sheep. But there are too many delicacies inside it, because sometimes our back can determine what happened to us about this call. Because many of us are really covenant children. Covenant in the sense that our African religion believes so much, our African setting believes so much that somebody must is not completely his own, that something is in charge of his life. That's why when a woman does not get a child, he begins to seek for help here and there. Sometimes you come to a priest to pray for him. You know the popular story of Hannah in the Bible, going to God to say, please give me a child and I'll give it back to you. Sometimes these women in their bid to get a child, we go to these deities, or some of these deities, and say, I need a child. Or go to them to worship those deities and say, give me a child, I'll give you this, I'll worship you, I will do that. Eventually, when this child is born, if I find this child having problems, bizarre things in his life, and sometimes you always see the person not succeeding in life. You find out that almost all the time he puts his hand in gets disintegrate. And the tendency for people to think that it is called, because you will see some gifts inside them that show that really there's something happening to them. Sometimes the person can begin to hear voices telling him, I am calling you, especially if the person there, I say if he's there, if they devote some time and go away, like a quiet place, a desert, to stay for some time, you begin to hear voices, which we could explain in two ways, that this deity that his mother consulted when he was in need is now demanding that this child will become his child. And that's why you begin to hear those voices. Oftentimes, the deity will disguise as an angel of light. If you remember 2 Corinthians chapter 11, the scripture says that sometimes the devil can disguise himself an angel of light to confuse people. So people who have this trouble now say they have a call. I wouldn't say they don't have a call, but what I'm saying, who is calling them? And who are they answering? Because if somebody is called by these deities and they come back now to be what? To become a priest or become a minister or become a pastor, you can see there will be a kind of what? A kind of pressure in him, living the life as Christ would want it, and obeying the voices that is what? Giving me information. Sometimes they also say, because when these people come and they ask you ask them something, they come to pray for you, they tell you every detail about your life, and tell you everything about your life, tell you about what is happening in your family, tell how things is happening. And you tend to think that because they can tell you these things, because of that, they have a call. But it's not true, because native doctors also have call. The spirit of divination can enter a man of God and is using him, and will still think that they have a call. But I will not say that they don't have call. But what I'm saying is, who is what? Calling them. And how do you identify you are being called? This is a very important question from what you ask. How do you identify now who is calling you? Then, if it is these deities that are calling the person, you always find tendency about failures in life, that have done a lot of things and it could not succeed. I've done this business, it didn't succeed. I've done this business, it didn't succeed. I've done this business, it didn't succeed. Once a person comes to me and talks about having done a lot of business and not succeeding, the first question I'll ask him, do you know the stories about your birth? And this person tends to tell me, I want the person to connect the mother or the parents. And invariably, you will find deep in the line that there was a promise, there was a kind of covenant. That's the type of people we call covenant children. Covenant children are not really about only God, because Samuel is a covenant child, so also another person can be a covenant child the other way. But if the person is a real call in the balance of Christian calling, that God is calling the person to shepherd his flock, there is one of the things that is always there: hunger for God, a hunger for holy things, a hunger for doing things for the right way. And you can see also that sometimes the human nature of the person can pop up and on. trying to take the person away, but you see that there is an interior hunger and coming unto God, not really because of failure in life. When failure in life is thing that is propels somebody saying they have a call, then the person should query his call and query the person is calling. Because if you are really called by God, there is an interior disposition and love for things that are holy. And if perchance somebody stops you from doing that, you find that sometimes those people who have that call, if perchance something stops them, you find that sometimes they tend to be useless because there is a kind of tendency inside them that they are not fulfilled, they are not doing what God want them to do. That's why I find that sometimes some of them who go out from the seminary find it difficult fixing in the world, even marrying, even when they marry, giving love for their wife becomes difficult because there seems to be something there. And even in the religious life, religious women and women, something happens. If you have that very internal disposition, love for God, it does not necessarily mean that you must hear in your voice that God is calling you. It could be an inspiration. God will put in something inside your mind, telling you that, driving you to somewhere.
And there you have it. Like he said, God's calls can come from anywhere. It can come from people, it can come from inside. But make sure you are first of all attuned to be able to receive that call. And what you should take from that particular answer is that God's call will always make you restless. It will always make you restless. You will not be able to find rest until you rest in Him. So the restlessness you're going to be feeling is that of a hunger to do things of God, a desire to always be in the service of God, a desire to devote your life totally, wholly, wholesomely to God in doing the things that He wants you to do. So make sure you understand that bit when it comes to God's call. Again, a profession is not a call, and I will keep stressing it throughout the duration of this episode. All right, it's time for a short break now, and when we come back from this short break, we'll be looking a little bit more about how we can answer God's call now that we finally know what God's call is. Stay with us. Welcome back to the show, and we've been looking at the topic of answering God's call. In fact, we've been looking at how to differentiate between God's call and any other call. And we've been looking at it through the eyes of Father Anthony Nnaji, a priest from the Diocese of Enugu, who gave us some very interesting answers on the issue. Let's get back straight into it. All right, so now let us look at this thing. One thing that I've noticed that God's call comes with is that it doesn't come easy. It doesn't guarantee anybody who is called by God is smooth sailing. Even as a normal Christian, your life is not guaranteed to be smooth. The journey of a Christian is a journey of peril, is a journey of prayer, is a journey of turbulence, with the main aim of resting in God. Let us hear Father Anthony's personal story on what God's call looks like.
Like myself, the time I noticed that something was working in my life was in 1982. I was in St. Paul Okunano in Enugu, and a priest was preaching on Mission Sunday. I was wrapped with attention, listening to the man and all he was saying about giving ourselves in service to God. I started having an inner disposition and telling me, are you not thinking that this man is talking about you? Are you not thinking that this man is talking about you? That's how I begin to give thought to it. But each time I want to drive it away, the thought will come back. I want to drive it away, the thought will come back. It took me from 1982 to 1987 to realize that this call is there. And when I answered this call, a lot of trouble started shooting up. I was supposed to be a Dominican brother. I was accepted as a Dominican. That was 1988 or 89 with Father Demina. Father Demina is my classmate. So we are there. But I find out that there's also discernment that comes with it. You don't only discern it alone, because the group of faith, people around you will also help you discern whether this call is from God or from something else. Because you could be calling yourself. You could find out that frustration is making you, or people around you are forcing you to answer this call. But because things around you are forcing you to answer this call. But people around you will help you discern where God is calling you and how God is calling you. In my journey into the priesthood, I joined the Spiritans. So I was called, but I couldn't live the life they were living because I saw something that does not suit what I think that God is calling me. I met the vocation director, talked to him about it, said I can't see myself parlaying with this type of life there. He begged me and said I should stay. I said, no, I can't stay because this is being forced myself. I left them, joined the MSP, and my parents and my people around me worked against it. They frustrated it. I left them also and joined the Dominican. I stayed for 2 years in the house there in Dominican, at Basil. At the time, the provincial superior, the general provincial superior came to Nigeria and asked me this question: why did you leave the Spiritan? I told him why I left the Spiritan. He said, they are not assured that I will not leave the priesthood if they accept me. They can't accept me. I said, okay, no problem. I left them. And I joined the diocese. That's how the journey got me to where I am now. So you see, it's a process of discernment. You don't just agree and say, I am called, therefore I'm called. Even if you are called and the church say you are not called, what will you do? So you begin to discern this call by the way you, with people around you and the way you live and things around your life. But this is what I'm saying, that we must distinguish profession with what call. Because if you mix it up, that's why a medical doctor will say that God called me to do what. But you can be called to be, everybody have a general call to be a Christian. And to proclaim the gospel of Christ. Everyone have that call. You can proclaim that gospel as a medical doctor, as an engineer, as this. But when it comes to call, and talking about ministering for God, being a minister of God, then I don't think it tallies with this profession. Because professionals are professionals, you can learn it. These are things you can learn. But things about call is not something you can place upon yourself. God decides how you answer it and what you do in your life.
That was a very, very interesting story, don't you think? And I want you to also pick out one thing that he noted in his story. Discernment. Discernment is very important. Even in your profession, when choosing your profession, it takes discernment for you to be able to settle upon what exactly you want to do with your life and how you exactly want to worship God with it. It is also the same thing, and it is even more important when it comes to God's call. You heard Father Anthony's stories on the hurdles he had to face before he became a priest. He went through several trainings, several orders before he finally settled upon being a diocesan priest. And he also had people along the line who helped him in discerning his mission, his vocation, his call to become a priest of God. So it is very important that you ask the Holy Spirit for discernment, and you also listen to the voice of God through other people who may be telling you things, who may be showing you things that will lead you closer to answering God's call. And that's what it means to have a discerning spirit when you are answering God's call. Another thing I would like us to understand when it comes to answering God's call is the fact that everybody is called to become a Christian. Everybody is called to be in the service of God, no matter the type of call you receive. However, it is important to note that when God calls you specially, you have to make sure that you are attuned to Him. You have to make sure that you are in line with Him, and you have to make sure that your prayer life is such that you can be able to listen to God and you can be able to hear directly from Him. The divine mandate that Jesus gave us when He was living, to go and make disciples of all nations, is not just left to the priests alone. It is for everybody. It is for everybody to be active partakers in. While some receive a special call into the ministry, some of us receive our own calls in different ways, where we can, show our Christianity through our profession, by serving and worshiping God in our profession. And that has been our show for today. Thank you so much for spending time with us as we try to clear the misunderstanding on what God's call is and how to answer God's call. Do not forget, a profession is not a call, and a call is something that you have to properly discern so you don't go and find yourself in the wrong places. But we're not leaving now. We'll move over to the Know Your Faith team for today's episode of Know Your Faith. Stay with us.
Hello and welcome to Know Your Faith series. I'm Collins, and today we'll be talking about how or why the church is referred to as one. When we profess the creed during the Mass on Sundays and on certain celebrations, when we say the Nicene Creed, there is a line there where we say, I believe in the one holy Catholic and apostolic church. So what does it mean when we refer to the church as one? And on today's episode, I'll be giving you the reasons why we refer to the church as one. So the first is the church is one in relation to the one living God, meaning that basically we have just one God who is the head of the church, that is the body. So however you want to put it, yes, we believe in the Trinity, but the Trinity is still one God. 2, the church is one in relation to Christ, for it includes all who are in Christ. And I think this also backs the previous point that we are the body and Christ is the head of that one church. And thirdly, the church is one throughout history. Now, this is something that I think that sometimes we try, no matter what will happen, things will surely happen, new churches will come up, different things, but we have to realize that the church was always one, is one, and will forever be one. All the saints that we know all came out from the same church, and so there's a generation and then there's a history of the church that shows clearly that the church is one. 4th, the church is one in all biblical pictures of it. There's only one household of God. There's only one body, and there can only be one church. Basically, that's what that means. And finally, the oneness of God must be seen as an integral part of the plan of God for the whole creation. Now, what this means is that the oneness refers to the integration of both word and deed. And on another episode, we talked about how, as Christians, our actions, we shouldn't just be all words, proclaiming the gospel, but also by action. So both in your words and your deed, you need to show that they are one. You must say the same and also act the same way. And even St. Paul tells us that he sees the oneness as a prophetic sign of that reconciled unity that will one day be true for all. So it's St. Paul reminding us that definitely that unity, the end time is still going to come and to be only for those who have tried as much as possible to reach for salvation. So that's it for today, guys. I hope that you've been able to understand why we refer to the church as one. And if you have any question, please feel free, comment, share, like, subscribe, you know the drill. And until I come your way next time, be bold and be Catholic.
Thank you to the Know Your Faith team for that wonderful one. I hope you were able to pick one or two things from that episode. Our saint of the week is Saint Basil the Great, someone who was called by God and answered God's call. He was born to the nobility, but his family was also a very pious family. They took the things of God seriously, so much so that his mother, his father, and 4 of his 9 siblings are actually canonized saints. Wow, imagine such a family of saints. It must be a beautiful thing. So one of his relatives is Saint Gregory of Nyssa. We'll eventually get to him in one of our episodes. And as a youth, Basil was noted for using his family's wealth to organize famine relief, because there was a time of famine in where he was based. So he organized a lot of famine relief and worked in a lot of kitchens to help feed the poor. And this was quite unusual for a young noble at the time. He studied in Constantinople and Athens, and he ran a school of oratory and law in Caesarea. Basil was so successful and so sought after as a speaker that he was tempted by pride. But fearful that it would overtake his piety, he sold all he had, he gave up his wealth, and became a priest. And this is how Basil answered God's call. He founded several monasteries and drew up rolls for monks living in the desert. He is considered as key to the founding of Eastern monasticism, as Saint Benedict of Nursia was considered key in founding of the monasticism of the West. He became the bishop and archbishop of Caesarea, and he conducted masses every day and preached every day, twice every day, to the crowds of Caesarea. And he is now considered a doctor of the church and also a father of the church. That is why he has the title of the Great. And that is the brief story of our saint of the week, Saint Basil the Great, a man who answered God's call. I hope you can emulate him and pray to him today to ask him for help in discerning God's call in your life. Thank you so much for watching today's episode once again. And if you missed any part of this show, if you want to clear your misunderstanding on what God's call means, make sure you check it out on our YouTube channel, Dominican Media Presents, where this episode and past episodes of the show will be available for your viewing pleasure. If you would like to continue to sponsor us or to support us to keep creating great content like this, which you definitely love, please call the number showing on your screen and visit the website dominicanmediang.com and tell us how you would love to be a part of this show. Until we come your way with another beautiful episode of Catholic Faith Forum, keep being saints in Jesus.